is Charles McCormick. I am the City Administrator for the City of Wilkes-Barre.
Henry Radulski. I am the Director of the Wilkes-Barre City Health Department.
First of all, my name is Jay Delaney, Jaydelaney. I'm the City Fire Chief, the Emergency Management Coordinator for the City of Wilkes-Barre, and a certified paramedic.
Normal temperature. Stranger. Normal temperature.
Yeah, actually, the mayor told me that they were planning on redoing this part of the building soon. He thinks it looks a little dingy down here.
It looks like Coughlin.
Yeah, city administrator.
Okay. Sure, he's up there. I'll be right there.
Says if the water company receives notice from the city and or the city's designee of
No, you don't hold the button.
I'm not.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I carry this right along and writes things down.
Typewriter. And then we have an award given to the City of Wilkes-Barre by the City of Wilkes-Barre. Education project. And I think things like documentaries, if they aren't strictly informational, then there's something wrong. There's something wrong there.
Yeah, okay.
And I think I'm a sufficient distance away. But
I feel good with it.
I would
vaccinated.
prefer that. If you're going to do a documentary, I prefer that, yeah.
check 1, 2, 3.
That's fine, I can hear myself actually.
All right, give us a check because you're a little farther away from the camera.
Check 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, the administration began in January of 2020, and within 2 months we ran into the COVID pandemic issue. Nothing's been normal since then. We had to keep moving daily, addressing issues that came up throughout our system, existing system in City Hall, police, fire, health, and we've been spending, quite frankly, the rest of the year just addressing all of those issues on a daily basis. The mayor, in the first few days of the circumstances, drew together all of the senior staff. We met on a daily basis. In the early days, we met twice a day, and addressing whatever needed to be addressed and whatever the previous day had presented as a problem for the City of Wilkes-Barre. Trying overall to maintain the City of Wilkes-Barre, maintain the services as best we could to provide for our residents.
Yeah, I'm vaccinated a couple months ago with my second shot. Our responsibility was first and foremost to keep our staff safe and healthy, followed secondly by our emergency response to the residents of the City of Wilkes-Barre for all kinds of calls. Our fire department does advanced life support ambulance service. So during the pandemic, we responded to about 8,000 emergency medical service calls, and hundreds of those were COVID positive transports.
Yeah, basically in public health, the measures that we were facing could be really broken down into, one is education. So we had to address preventative health from a social, behavioral aspect. So that's the first thing we had to do. Not only do we have to do that to the public, but we also had to do it for our employees. After that, a key component for public health during the pandemic was we had to identify those people who were infected with COVID, and that's done through a testing process. Whether it's PCR, antigen testing, we're involved with that. Once we actually identify the person, we have to do contact tracing, so which is a rather tedious job in that you have to contact those people who are positive and their contacts. After we have identified and we've done contact tracing, the next component is vaccination, and that's the process we're in now. So fortunately, the health department, for the past 19 years, we have done drive-through influenza clinics. When we did those influenza clinics, we thought we were doing them, or I should say many people thought we were doing them just to provide the influenza vaccine to the public. But the real reason we were doing it was to practice for mass immunizations in the event of a pandemic. So the vaccine part has become something that we have trained long and hard for.
I think, as everybody, nobody really wanted to believe the extent of what was possible, even though the mayor and I have the benefit of being older, so we've seen some things that, as we were growing up, that other generations haven't, but not a pandemic. So it was hard initially to get to grasp the complexity and the overall involvement on a national, state, and local level of what the pandemic did. And you were always hoping for the best, and the best wasn't always coming out, and so you had to keep adapting to that, more and more problems. At some point we were able to get it all under some semblance of control, but the first 2 to 3 months it was, every day was, what problem we're going to handle, can we get around this, what are we going to do? There are financial issues, there are physical issues. We were benefited greatly by an existing health department. That was, I don't know if we could have made it through as well as we have without the existing health department, for 2 reasons. First of all, they had the background and the expertise, so we could build on that expertise on how to respond. And the second is purely financial. We had an existing stream of money from the Pennsylvania Department of Health that helped to sustain all of these added costs that were arising. This was before the federal assistance and the state assistance. So we were able to keep our heads above water, which a lot of municipalities were not able to do.
It certainly was. Well, we started February 28th of 2020 in our mode to protect our staff and to respond to the pandemic. PPE was a major issue that we had to deal with to protect our staffs. You know, on normal medical calls, our staff would wear exam gloves. That's the normal protocol. But now with the pandemic, we really had to kick it up to wear a mask, and then it was N95, and then when we learned more about the virus and it was full PPE, personal protection equipment is what PPE stands for, and a barrage of our firefighter EMTs and our paramedics to be dressed appropriately. They have the appropriate level of PPE on to treat and transport these patients.
Although I had involved myself over my career in a lot of city hall type of functions, so I had a reasonably good idea of the overall operations here. That was an issue that never popped into my mind at all.
I think notable moments. I think 2. One is from my employees who are extremely dedicated, and you know, the toll it took on them when you're working 7 days a week and, you know, 12 to 16 hours a day for a long period of time, and to see the emotional look on their face, you know, was memorable, something I'll never forget. But they worked through it and, you know, continued to work long and hard. I think the other thing, you know, I think one thing that I always remember, and of course I did not experience it personally, but those pictures that you would see on TV where at a nursing home, where a loved one was standing next to a window and they couldn't be in there with their mother or father or grandmother or grandfather, and they their hand touched the glass, and I just thought that was very emotional.
Well, the state and the country, the national response is more of an overview issue. Now with the vaccine, it's a distribution issue, but it's an overall. When you're in a city, it's day to day. How do you provide the services without exposing either your residents or your employees to expanding the pandemic? And one aspect that people forget, because the discussion on a national or state level is always with a Zoom meeting or some type of press conference, but we all have families, we all have to go back to our families. We all were exposed. We never stopped working. I've been working since day one of the pandemic. We didn't have 2 months that we had to lock down. And so there was always that constant risk of what are we doing with our coworkers? What are we doing with the residents? And then how are we going to respond with our family? So there were just the day-to-day, more integral, one-person-on-one relationship that you don't get on a national or a state level. You don't get that feel.
Well, the leadership started with the mayor. In the very beginning of when the pandemic started, we had a St. Patrick's Day parade that was knocking on our door that was going to be downtown. And the mayor quickly assembled a really good team. I was part of that team. We made decisions every single day. And through his recommendations in the fire department, we started a COVID-19 working group made up of union officials, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, and fire administrative staff to try to make policy to deal with the pandemic.
Well, I come from self-employment, so I sort of work long hours all the time, but certainly we weren't a 9-to-5 circumstance. We were running well into the early evening, and our first times over on weekends. Our first meeting, I recall, was on a Saturday. So working wasn't that difficult for me or for the mayor, and I think our senior staff adapted very, very well.
Yeah, so as established before, the other men we interviewed, they had already been working within the local government for a period of time before this administration, right?
Yes, and they provided the stability and the knowledge and the institutional knowledge that you really need, especially when you're facing any type of an emergency, but certainly this type of an emergency. It was very important that we had ongoing older staff that have been in their positions for many years.
I mean, the only thing that I would offer is that our staff is used to taking care of medical emergencies, medical, trauma, fire, all those things. Dealing with the pandemic put a whole higher level of keeping our staff healthy, because if our staff got the virus, it could spread to a whole fire station and to the whole fire department. So we really, disinfecting several times a day, having the right amount of PPE and the right of equipment to disinfect. This is a whole new response dilemma we had. Now, in 2014, we dealt with Ebola. So we learned, and very fortunately, we had a lot of the PPE that was needed that no one else had in the beginning from 2014 in Ebola. So we learned back then, and we just carried that through the last year. And fortunately, our fire department emergency responders did just a fairly amazing job to try to stay healthy, to be able to respond to all these emergency calls we had citywide.
The first day and a half to 2 days, trying to get a handle on this sudden nature and the complete shutdown that was going to be occurring, and how we were going to be able to maintain as normal as we can City Hall functioning. The priority, obviously, at the beginning was police and fire, because they were the entities in the city that most often met with the residents, and certainly they had the highest risk factors. So the early couple of weeks, it was spent on how do we protect the police and fire departments so that they can maintain those services that are really going to be the services that are needed by the residents initially. Then the next item we had to move to was how we were going to keep the DPW workers operating, because trash, garbage, etc. was going to accumulate and people were going to be at home, and how could we keep those people safe also. If you recall, at the beginning it was unclear whether the virus was transmittable by contact and surface contact. So especially with the DPW people, we had a whole other level of concern about picking garbage up, picking recyclables up, and keeping them safe. So that became material issues, PPE as they call them, gloves, masks, distancing, you can't really distance in a truck with three people in it for DPW. So that presented a completely different challenge. And then City Hall, how are we going to maintain our services? How are we going to allow people to at least do some things that they're used to? How can we, frankly, receive money, which we need in order to pay our bills and pay our employees? So various levels of administrative necessities pop up basically week by week.
Well, I think obviously you could always do something better, and we go day to day. Normally, after any type of event, you do an after action report. However, things move so quickly that you were really on the run, day to day, minute to minute, making changes. So I think the ability to adapt as quickly as possible, that was very important. And I think also the social, behavioral, preventive health programs, I think if we had some enhanced technology and data to get that outreach and messaging to the public faster, that would have made things much better. Because what you have is you have so much information coming that you receive, whether it's from CDC to the Pennsylvania Department of Health to us, that you would actually get off a phone call or a Zoom call, and they give you some parameters to go by or new policies. You would hang up the phone, put your email on, and that policy just changed from when you were on the Zoom conference. And then later that day, it may change again. So, managing all that information overload was something that we would definitely address in the future.
I would say our health department assisted in a great degree for the administration, for Mayor Brown and myself. A lot of other cities, if you didn't have a health department, they, I think, had way more problematic approaches that they had to address. Information, PPEs, available sources. I think their challenge was, I'm sure, much worse than ours, because I don't think they had the existing superstructure and the infrastructure to deal with it, or the expertise. So I would say we were very, very fortunate for that, the administration.
Well, we can always get better at everything we do, so there's no doubt about that. But I was confident working for this team here and my team at the fire department that we challenged ourselves to do the best, to educate ourselves the best we can, and to respond appropriately. And we were blessed throughout this pandemic to have the resources that we needed to respond. Again, every single call, you had to have a gown, you had to have gloves, you had to have a mask. We had to wear booties when we went into many of these nursing homes. We had to have all this different gear that we didn't really wear on a regular basis. So we challenged ourselves, and I really think we got it right here with what we did and how we did it.
Yes, as the Chief Delaney was explaining, because I think it was Chief Delaney was explaining about the Ebola, etc. We were very fortunate, not only with the health department, but we had a backlog of some PPE readily available. We had face masks, we had gloves, we had some personnel robing, etc., which we had initially, which many people did not. So we were able to move ahead reasonably quickly with that, but that's going to be an ongoing issue. We've started to stockpile some of this we've adapted some of our buildings. We've adapted equipment to give us the ability, should another virus issue hit, we're able to sustain ourselves in the first 2 to 3, 4 months of something like this, much more than we were at the beginning. So there are some benefits to that. Hopefully, for your generation, you can wait another 100 years before you have something on this type of a scale. But I think we've learned that our system's in pretty good shape.
No, I just think this was not something that we could do by ourselves. It was a collaboration, starting at the top with our mayor, down through police, fire, paramedics, and even employees in the city. It's an overwhelming job, and people have stepped up. People who have never been either in public health or their job responsibility wasn't for communicable disease investigations or compliance or things like that. So I think it was just a fantastic overall effort, to be successful and become where we are right now.
I think long term, I'm looking down the road, as the administration needs to. We're going to have very significant long-term effects, but we can't really define them as well. Certainly businesses, who's coming back, that has an effect on the finances of the city. I don't think we're going to know that for the next year to 2 years on the ultimate effect on the city, on their revenue sources. We also have an increased population, increased renters. Many people fled to larger cities in response to the pandemic. So we have significantly increased public services that we have to provide. The easiest ones to define are garbage, recycling, etc., which are a struggle for us because we have limited resources and we have limited personnel. So health and code issues are really going to probably be a long-term issue for the city of Wilkes-Barre, at least over the next 2 to 3 years, on how we adapt to this increased population. Well, I think it's a little stronger than people thought. Everyone had rough calculations, including myself, about what type of loss of revenue and what the businesses are. But many of our businesses continue to operate, albeit virtual. So I believe the biggest issue for business in the downtown is, are we going to get those office workers back? Because many businesses live day to day with the ability of the office holder, people working in the offices, to come back. So that's a priority number one. Hopefully when we get to the early summer, that the office workers will come back into town. That'll provide sources for our restaurants, for our shopping areas, and we miss that. That's a major issue for us.
You guys are in a room. Is there anything else that you think would be important?
I think we got a lot.
I think we got a lot today. I think we got a lot farther than I thought we would.
Well, there are. Oh, maybe I shut that off.
Sure. It is a great fun.
Is that what I said? Okay.
I'm not sure if you said it is a great fun or it was a great fun.
I'll still do it in a take. Hello, my name's Connor Trail, and I'd like to thank you for watching this documentary. I'd also like to thank my fellow students, Jeffrey Siegfried and Mitchell Warnick. They were a great help manning the cameras and taking notes. I'd also like to thank the city administrator, Mr. McCormick, for helping me organize interviews. I'd especially like to add that it was a great amount of fun recording in the mayor's office and in City Hall. I'm very excited to see what the renovations of the first floor will look like in the future. Because as Mitch says, it looks like Coughlin.